4, 5, and 6, we're still graphing the secant or the cosecant, but now we have a phase shift to our graph. And so, again, we're going to do it just like we did when we graphed the sine and the cosine. We're just going to adjust it to the inverse once we do our problem. So secant is the inverse of the cosine curve. So we have 0 pi over 2 pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi for our normal starting values. For our cosine curve, we normally start up at 1, end at 1, have negative 1 in the middle, and our zeros are between those two things. So we want to take here the 3x minus pi and set it equal to each of these values. So I'm going to set it equal to 0. I'm going to slide over here a little bit so I have some writing room. Pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and then equal to 2 pi. So when I solve these, first I'm going to add pi to everything. So add my pi. So 0 plus pi is pi. Pi over 2 plus pi. 1 pi plus 1/2 would give me 3/2. So 3 pi over 2. Pi plus another pi, 2 pi. 3 pi over 2 plus pi, which is 2 over 2, would be 5 pi over 2, or 3/2 plus 1 if you need to use your calculator. 2 pi plus pi, 3 pi. Once I've added pi to everything, I still have to get rid of my coefficient, so dividing by 3, which is multiplying by 1/3. So I'm going to times everything times 1/3. So this is just going to give me pi over 3. This is going to give me, the 3's cancel out, pi over 2. Here, nothing's going to cancel out. I'm going to get 2 pi over 3. Here, nothing's going to cancel out. I get 5 pi over 6. Here, the 3's cancel out. I just get a plain old pi. So, cosine curve normally starts up, but since this is a negative, I'm going to have a negative 1/2. Then I have my 0, which on my secant curve is going to be my asymptote. Then I have negative 1 times negative 1/2, so I'm going to go up to positive 1/2. Then I have a 0, so again I'm going to have my asymptote. Then I have 1 times my negative 1/2, so negative 1/2. So my asymptotes are at pi over 2, and my other asymptote is at 5 pi over 6. So I can't go to the right to get to my next asymptote. I'm going to have one back here. I have 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces. So 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces. Puts me at pi over 6 for my other asymptote since they want 3 of them on there. So at pi over 3, I'm at negative 1/2. Again, you'll have to use the point tool to get it exactly where it goes. 2 pi over 3, I'm at a positive 1/2. And then at pi, I'm back down to negative 1/2. And so again, when you hit the graph, whoops, I better draw that the right way. That one went down first. It was at negative 1/2. My secant function is going to look something sort of like that. So number 5, this time we're going to do a cosecant function. The cosecant is the inverse of the sine, so we think about our table for sine. 0, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. Sine curve starts at 0, ends at 0, the middle is 0, normally goes up first and down second. And so here's my shift. I'm going to say x minus pi over 2 equals 0, equals my pi over 2, equals pi, equals 3 pi over 2, and equals 2 pi. On this one, to solve it, all we're going to do is add our pi over 2. Since we don't have a coefficient in front of our x, makes it a little shorter. So add my pi over 2 on each of these. So 0 plus pi over 2 is pi over 2. Pi over 2 plus pi over 2 is 2 pi over 2, which is pi. 1/2 plus 1/2 is 1. 1 plus 1/2 would give me 3 pi over 2. 3 pi over 2 plus 1 pi over 2 is 4 pi over 2, which is 2 pi. And 2 pi plus pi over 2, this would be 4 plus 1, so 5 pi over 2. So 2 plus 1/2, 2 1/2, or 5 halves, right? Sine curve is the inverse of the cosecant, so if this is a 0, this is going to be an asymptote, this is going to be an asymptote, this is going to be an asymptote, starting middle end. Normally we go up. 1 times 2 is 2. Negative 1 times 2 is negative 2. So at pi over 2 I have an asymptote. At 3 pi over 2 I have an asymptote. At 5 pi over 2 I have an asymptote. At pi I'm up to positive 2. At 2 pi I'm down to negative 2. And when I hit graph then, I'm going to have the graph of my cosecant curve. And number 6, we're doing the secant curve again. The secant is the inverse of the cosine. And so my normal cosine, 0, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. My normal cosine curve starts up. In the middle it's down. At the end it's up. And in between each of those we're at our zeros. My shift, here I have x plus pi over 2. We want it to equal 0, to equal pi over 2, to equal pi, to equal 3 pi over 2, and to equal 2 pi. So again on this one, all we need to do is subtract our pi over 2. Again, we don't have a coefficient that we have to worry about dividing by. So minus my pi over 2 to solve each of these. So 0 minus pi over 2 is negative pi over 2. Pi over 2 minus pi over 2 is 0. 1 minus 1/2 would be pi over 2. Or 2 pi over 2 minus 1 pi over 2 is pi over 2. 3 pi over 2 minus pi over 2 would be 2 pi over 2, which is just pi. 2 pi minus pi over 2, this would be 4 minus 1, which gives me 3 pi over 2. So normal cosine curve goes up, but this one has a minus sign in front, so it's going to start in the negative direction, negative 1. Then we have our 0, which is our asymptote. And then we go negative 1, but negative and a negative is going to make that a positive 1. Then we have a 0, which is our asymptote. And then 1 times negative 1, again, going to be negative 1. So we're going to have an asymptote at 0. We have an asymptote at pi, which means we're also going to have an asymptote at 2 pi, if I could draw straight. Don't have negative pi over 2 to graph. At positive pi over 2, we're up at 1. And at 3 pi over 2, we're down to negative 1. Again, when I hit my graph button then, I'm going to have something that sort of looks like that, which is going to be the graph of my secant curve.